Again, thank you so much to Brandon for that wonderful talk and for taking the time to answer some of our questions. Switching gears for one final time today, we're going to round out our conference by welcoming back a panel of our conference speakers, as well as our third moderator, Suzanne Decker, to answer some final questions. Okay. Guys, thank you so much for being back with us. And to start off, Nina, one of our audience members asked how old you were when you received your diagnosis and noted that they were reluctant to diagnose teens with personality disorders, though they could also understand how having that diagnosis could also potentially help the child or parent or the family. I think this is an issue that a lot of people wonder about and maybe worry about. So I wondered if Nina and Nancy, maybe if you could comment on this first, and then Alan and Nate, if you could talk about this. Love to hear your thoughts as well.
So I was 18 years old when I was diagnosed with BPD. However, I'm a psych student, so I have a DSM. I looked through the DSM, and it was something that Alan actually pointed out and I was curious about, that there's nothing in the DSM that states that you cannot diagnose BPD before a certain age. There's nothing there. And honestly, and even if there's therapists and clinicians and doctors out there that have that reluctance still due to the lack of just kind of updating themselves on borderline and new policies and new regulations and protocols, the least that anyone could have done was, hey, she has traits. Even if you're not comfortable saying, hey, you have borderline personality disorder because you're scared of that stigma, at least saying, hey, you have these traits. Hey, maybe getting into DBT a little early, or even learning these crisis management skills and how to better manage your emotions, emotion regulation. That was the one that I was missing from earlier. Learning those things at an early age would have helped tremendously and would have saved me and my family a lot of pain. Emotion regulation, distress tolerance isn't just for borderline. It's for everyone. It works for everyone because a lot of people, especially in my generation, as mental health is becoming less and less taboo, it will benefit them greatly. We kind of got sidetracked, but yes.
I think great points, and clearly something you feel strongly about them that's affected you deeply. Alan, I saw you nodding. Do you have some thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought is that Nina's very wise about this. You're exactly right. Number one, on a couple of things. One is that there's nothing about the DSM or the diagnosis of BPD that requires a person to be 18 or older. It's about an enduring pattern. So it's not just a blip in something that's a one and done during a very stressful period, but something that's continuing over time and problematic. But number two, you're also right that this is transdiagnostic, right? Suicidality and self-harm and severe emotion dysregulation are not limited to borderline personality disorder. I tend to think about, and many people tend to think about borderline personality disorder as a kind of prototype for those problems, for that cluster of problems. But certainly those problems exist even when people don't meet criteria for borderline personality disorder. And so looking at the work that's done with teens, which is really good work, it's intervention and you can think about it as prevention for adults, and now some new programs for kids. One of the breakout rooms was addressing this very issue for 8 to 12-year-olds who can really struggle. Who knew? But, if we ask, we find out. So there's a lot of things we can do with or without the BPD diagnosis, if as a field we pay attention in that way.
And also, I will say for the parents, educating the parents earlier on about how I parented myself, but I had an entirely different child. And if I'd known, if she were screened earlier, I would have parented her differently. And actually, when I discovered all this when she was 18, I apologized to her, or I acknowledged that I wasn't the mother that she needed. because I didn't know. And I wish I had.
Yeah.
Wonderful points. And thank you so much, Nancy, for jumping in. Please, if you have responses to each other or if you bring up points that one of you has a response to, please feel free to jump in at any point throughout this discussion. Nate, did you have an opinion on this? Thoughts about appropriate age of diagnosis for BPD?
I completely agree with everything that's been said. I have had the experience early on in my career where I was kind of told, here we don't diagnose personality disorders before age 18. That was not accurate, but it was something at least some years ago in clinics that I've looked in that I have seen, and I completely agree that it's critical, that we do begin treating people as early as possible. As has already been mentioned, it's really a way to prevent a whole myriad of problems by giving both children, adolescents, and their parents the skills necessary to be able to effectively cope with this. So I just completely agree. Nothing to add.
Thank you so much.
So Seth Axelrod, who was the co-founder of this conference, loved this part of the conference the most, the panel where people really talk to each other across their experiences. And I have a Seth kind of question for you. It's a big picture question. Given all the things we've talked about today, stigma and access and culture, what kinds of policy changes do you think are most essential or could have the biggest impact for folks struggling with BPD and for their families? What needs to change and where do we start? I'd love to hear from all of you.
Early screening, pediatricians even, right? We screen for eyes, ears, autism, eating disorders, all kinds of things. Why aren't we screening at a young age? I mean, I think that we would have known when she was 8 or 9 that she was highly sensitive.
Yeah.
I completely
agree, Nancy, with that. I'll just go big and say, the single biggest change that we could make would be enacting a single payer option or a single payer system, so people actually have access regardless of their geography or their means. And coupled with that would be, of course, within a single payer system, there's much more benefit to the system to actually following the evidence and offering evidence-based care, not just random or whatever people want to offer. Because especially with specialty care in particular, some treatments just clearly work better than others. With less severe problems, many things can be helpful. The more severe problems, the fewer things work well. So paying attention to the evidence. So that's two big things that would require, frankly, a couple of big policy shifts, but we'll go for the big ones.
I agree with everything that's been said. I especially agree with the idea of screening earlier and screening in adulthood as well. I mean, just there's a real need for increased screening. I also think, as I alluded to, I would really love to see some major changes enacted with respect to the way the VA, the Department of Defense handle things. I think we've kind of covered that ground, but I think that what I would love to see, I mean, I think it's unlikely that there would ever be kind of service connection that would come about in relation to BPD, but what I would love is to see treatment provided regardless of service connection status for individuals that are suffering with borderline personality disorder or other types of disorders. I would essentially love to just see free mental health made available to those that are in need, kind of getting out of the service connection piece and instead just focusing on giving treatment to the people that need it. So that's what I would like to see in my own space.
Thank you all so much. So for those of us who felt really inspired by Brandon Marshall's idea of walking the halls of Congress, these are some of the things we can be calling our members of Congress about. Early screening, Access to healthcare for all. Nate's got another idea. Take it away.
I also meant to mention that there is still tremendous underrepresentation of borderline personality disorder research in research funding. It's right there with eating disorders as a tremendously under-researched area. As I mentioned, non-suicidal self-injury also in that same class, and I think that's another very solid step that could be taken to have specific requests for applications specifically focused on improved research on this important disorder.
Thank you so much.
Suzanne, do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Go for it.
Sure.
Suzanne's initial big Seth question also had that where do we need to start component, what needs to change? And I love this idea that you've all kind of advocated for, which is the early screenings. So what do we need to do to make that happen? Is it psychoeducation? Is it, notifying people in Congress? Is it getting the word out first? Or what needs to change first? What systems need to be targeted, and where can people start kind of putting their effort in order to make that change?
Well, one of the biggest impediments to early screening is that there's no place to send somebody when they screen positively in most communities. So it's frankly very problematic to ask someone to do an early screening and a family or a child to get screened to be told, well, there's good news and bad news. Our early screening has detected something early, and now you're probably going to have to wait 10 years until it's a lot worse before you have access to treatment. So they go hand in hand, I think that having accessible treatment then makes early screening possible, and without the former, I think the latter is probably dead in the water. I don't know. What do you all think? Nobody's tried this, so that's pure speculation. But what do you think?
It certainly could be. I think that money is always a huge issue, and I have endeavored to try to demonstrate that borderline personality disorder and NSSI are extremely costly if left untreated, and trying to use that as a persuasive argument to insurance companies and funders and other sorts of people that it really is in their best interest to provide good, high-quality treatment at the earliest opportunity so as to avoid a lifetime of unnecessary suffering and cost. Again, if we're realistically, money has a lot to do with many of these things, and that is a place where I think research could be really useful, demonstrating the impact of early intervention programs. Could really be a game changer. A single payer system would help a lot as well, but within the confines of what we're working with.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came in through the chat, kind of relevant to this discussion, is like, what even kinds of questions or modalities would you use for this early screening? Like, what would you be looking for in, Nina had mentioned that she felt like she had traits and symptoms from the time she was born. Like, what would we be looking for in an 8, 9, 10-year-old that might help in indicating that, hey, maybe this person needs a little bit more support?
Nina was having trouble with her peers at school. I think you talk to the parents and you talk to the child. She was having trouble connecting with her peers and, feeling isolated and feeling alone. And I'm speaking for her right now. But yeah, I think it was clear then, right, that you felt disenfranchised. And also understanding that the hypersensitivity that goes along with borderline, it's not like a lot of parents and teachers will notice, oh, this child is too sensitive, quote unquote, too sensitive to what's going on, which can be indicative of the intense emotions that said child is feeling. That is kind of a telltale sign of, oh, you might have a borderline trait, and we should probably teach you how to regulate that emotion.
her second grade teacher at the parent-teacher conference said she was a very experienced, she was ready to retire, and she said to me and my husband, "I see signs in your daughter of being a victim. She acts like a victim, and you better watch out for that." Like there was, it was her fault. And I didn't know what to do with that, but she noticed that in second grade.
Really, really solid points, guys. Thank you. Next kind of discussion point. So, Nina, as you were talking about your experiences, you had mentioned how the military culture of your ex-husband was extremely invalidating for you, right? This kind of idea of like, soldier on, suck it up, buttercup, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you're having a hard time, it's because you're not trying hard enough. Nate, this question is primarily directed for you, but how do you see this playing out for veterans with borderline personality disorder? It's kind of impact of military culture.
Yeah, so we've talked about this a number of times today. Brandon talked about it, I think, extremely in a very relevant way with respect to kind of the hypermasculine realm of football and a variety of other sports. Applies to a number of other professions. I work with a lot of firefighters. That's about a 90% male dominated occupation. Again, lots of stereotypically masculine sorts of things. And one of the things that we've done some research on is looking to see the degree to which military training explicitly does, in fact, kind of increase adherence to traditional masculine norms. And some of those are quite problematic. And I had a lot of hypotheses that have not actually borne out perhaps as well as I would have hyped or would have hoped. That happens sometimes when we conduct research. But the fact of the matter is that there absolutely is, from a cultural perspective, many aspects of borderline personality disorder, as well as just kind of general emotion dysregulation problems that are quite problematic within these cultural contexts where you are taught to, bottle it up, suck it up, and move forward and kind of keep it to yourself. And I think that it's just an extreme challenge that we're going to have to continue to to work with institutions. I actually have a veteran that is in my lab right now who is extremely focused in this very issue. He's actually developed a scale that we're hoping will eventually get out there and maybe make its way into the DoD, where he's really focused on this warrior mentality and the potential effects that it specifically has on emotional regulation and the negative effects, and trying to really parse that apart. And I think it's a new idea that has been, maybe not a new idea, but it's something that I'm not aware has really been looked at. But I think it's an extremely important point that we very well may be reinforcing many of these extremely problematic coping approaches, that can really backfire on people long term.
I would really love to hear about that line of research. That sounds spectacular. Nina, I'm wondering if you have any other thoughts on this. The experience of being a military spouse is a very, very unique one. And just hearing how kind of the emotional invalidation that's kind of pervasive in a military culture sort of spilled over at home really just kind of brings to light this idea that it's, people who are in the military, it's not just them. They do go home to families as well. And the experiences that they have also impacts their families.
Yeah, it was, having borderline and being married to a Marine was tough. Yes, he had the mentality of, you gotta just suck it up, you gotta just get over it, you'll be fine if you work. And then I think there were moments where he did see, like, that's not gonna work for you, so we gotta do something else. But then he would immediately go back to, oh, but you're just being weak, you gotta get over it. And it's really sad because, it's not just like with your loved ones, it's with your friends, it's with your parents, it's with your siblings. It's not just like, it's just an overall mentality that spills over. And it's really sad because I mean, when I lived on base with my ex-husband, there were about 3 suicides for individuals who had undiagnosed mental disorders and couldn't get any help. And their suicide notes were just, I'm sorry, I don't know what else to do. And it was so sad just to see that mentality of, you got to just soldier through it when there's people who are really, really needing help. I have close friends now who are out of the Marines, out of the Army, who have PTSD, CPTSD, borderline, bipolar, like all of these different disorders, and they can't get help because it's shameful to them. So, I mean, it's just hopefully a culture that will change eventually. But unfortunately, because I do think that they have that like warrior protector complex, it's not going to change anytime soon. So all we can do as the spouses is just like bring that softness into that culture as much as we can, and validate ourselves and validate the other Milso spouses, like, and just do what we can, because we know that we can't change that and we can't change them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Alan, did you have anything to add?
Well, there's lots of parts to this. It's complicated because whenever we talk about culture, we're really talking about diversity, and we're talking, there's lots of different people, and we're talking about goodness of fit. And so clearly, Nina, what you're saying is that was, there are aspects of that are just incredibly invalidating of your experience. So the goodness of fit there was very poor. For someone who's doesn't have a lot of emotion sensitivity and a lot of reactivity, that cultural fit may not be as problematic, right? So, but the idea, I think, is to expand diversity within that setting, and when we talk about a military culture, there's a lot of choice in that, right? It's not like a a background, a family culture, that we bring with us that has evolved for lots of reasons that are historical and grounded in people's needs. So I think that trying to think of this as goodness of fit can be helpful. There's nothing inherent about being in the military that says one can't be emotionally sensitive. In principle, I think in practice that might be very complicated and create a lot of invalidation, but I don't know that in principle it's not possible.
I will just mention, I do think that the military across branches has become far more progressive during the last 20 years, when I've kind of, as I've been around veterans and friends and family members who have undergone it. And I think that, there is a continuing upswing in terms of, thinking about mental health in particular in more appropriate ways. I've cited some of the, very kind of bad times, in the past, but I think that there have been real improvements.
I will second that. I think military culture has come a really, really long way. And at the same time, I know some work being done by our team is showing that a astronomical number of service members are being hospitalized for suicide-related reasons or attempting to end their lives at rates that don't typically get reflected in kind of the official documentation that goes out. So I agree with both sides. There has been a lot of work that's been done, and so much more needs to be done.
Absolutely.
Agreed. Absolutely crucial issues to address. And a lot of this talk has centered so far around validation. And Nina, you in particular have talked about how important validation is to you. Can you say a little bit about what validation does for you when you get it, in particular, maybe from a family member or from a loved one, what that's like.
I think the best way that I can describe it is when I get validated, I think the first thing I think is, oh my God, I'm not crazy. Like, it's not just something I'm making up in my head. I'm not this over dramatic person. I'm not being too sensitive. Validation shows me that my response is appropriate for the emotions that I'm feeling then. Maybe, like in some situations, maybe my emotional response isn't like appropriate at that time, but having that validation is still like, it's okay to have emotions. It's okay to feel this way. And what skills can we use moving forward to help you either simmer down, relax? How can we help you? And so, I mean, like the best way I can explain it is, oh my God, I'm not crazy. Oh my God, my emotions make sense. Cool. It's really, it makes a world of difference to someone with BPD. It really does.
She will call me now over the last 2 or 3 years, and the first thing she'll say is, do you have a minute to validate me? And that means something just happened and she's ready to maybe do something she doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
And I know I put on my validating hat. Actually, the minute I see, her name on my phone, I'm like, validation hat. And which I should do with everybody because it's very effective. Yeah, she'll actually ask for it specifically. Because now we have that language with each other. And then she'll say, okay, I'm good, click.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Our final question for our panel is another big picture Seth Axelrod style question. What are the things you want to see BPD research focusing on in the next couple of years? And I'd love to hear from all 4 of you. Where do you want our researchers to be going to answer the questions that we need to have answered?
Again, early screening. Like, I cannot say it enough. Early screening, early screening, early screening. There's still so much research that needs to get done with BPD, but I mean, teaching clinicians that you actually can diagnose BPD early and having that, I know a lot of people are against labels, but having that diagnosis and possible label actually brings a lot of relief to people because it gives us, okay, here's the treatment. So there's mentalization, there's DBT, there's CBT, there's all different types of resources out there for you as long as you have that diagnosis. And also teaching people about family connections. That's something that because I'm a case manager right now, I give it to people who are like, I don't know what to do with this person. Family connections. I don't know how to deal with this. Family connections. Like giving people access and resources to that. And again, early detection. So important.
Yeah, I agree. And my friendly addition to that is more research on early intervention and prevention. Trying to identify kids of any age, younger kids, tweens, teens, before they have really serious problems. We're not good at this. We're not good at identifying them early and then knowing what to do with them, other than wait and see if it gets worse. So I think early intervention, prevention efforts, and figuring out, the screening is. I think I agree completely with the screening, but we're not really sure what the predictors are. We have to figure out, how do we know who's going on this trajectory that we can interrupt that trajectory, not wait until the problems are so big it's easy to screen for them. And then, of course, some of it's a little bit selfish. Some of my own research, of course, is developing interventions for families that help families and people with BPD and related problems. And I would love to see that research expanded well beyond family connections and well beyond DBT to other settings, other treatments, other ways to do that.
And Nate?
Lots of things that I would like to see additional research on in this domain. I think that I cannot apologies. I can't emphasize enough how important I think that the early screening is. I think that this is a key issue. One of the great things, so just leaving that, right there, one of the great things is that we do have a highly effective treatment. However, the access remains a critical issue for people all across the country. That's why I was so excited about that SP 2.0 program that I mentioned, because it's telehealth based. There are trials, a variety of different kinds that are called STEPS trials or SMART trial. There's all kinds of different things. I would love to see across the spectrum work, just as Alan was talking about, trying to find the right level of intervention so that potentially we could use far less costly interventions and make them available to far more people early on, right? So same amount of kind of money and resources, but effectively targeted and giving people, maybe a much like simpler course of treatment that, doesn't involve
10 times as many people, right?
Right. That's right. Exactly. I would love to see work in that space, in particular with that 8 to 12-year-old and the adolescence range, college students, all through there. I will also put on a personal plug that I do psychiatric genetics research, and we do that for a reason. And one of the reasons that we do that is we really do need to understand the biology of borderline personality disorder much, much better than we do. We need to have medications that will help people. Many different disorders, outside of mental health diseases have, very effective treatments that are far easier to implement. And it would be wonderful if we could find things that could help people. So I think that it's the full gamut, all the way from basic research to help us understand the underlying neurobiology. As was mentioned, about 50% of heritability for borderline personality disorder is purely genetics, all the way out to implementation of what we know works and making it effective and accessible to people in the community.
Fantastic. Thanks to all four of you. We have a sense of where the work is now, right? All the way from the very early lab stuff to the how do we get the effective treatments we already know work to the people, with some real focus on screening and predictors of treatment and course. What I want to remind all of us is that I'm going to tie this back to what Brandon Marshall was saying. He was talking about walking the halls of Congress and telling people, hey, here are the problems, here is what we need. He has a platform. I encourage all of you to find a platform and use it. This is important. Let's get together and ask for the things we want and need from those who have the power. So that is my call to arms for all of us. Emily, take it home.
Awesome. Thank you to our outstanding lineup of speakers today, and to all of you who joined us this year. A record number, over 600 people registered for this year's conference, including more than 70 people with lived experience of borderline personality disorder. Unprecedented numbers for this conference, so thank you to each of you who registered and attended today. We sincerely hope that everyone enjoyed today's conference as much as we did. And to wrap us up this afternoon, I'd like to share a few final notes and reminders. First, to those of you who are expecting to receive continuing education credits for today, if you scroll on down, one of those tabs says continuing education on it. There are detailed step-by-step instructions in there on how to receive your credits. It's going to involve you logging back into your TMS account, completing an attendance verification, and a post-conference survey. We'll be sending out detailed instructions on how to go about this over the next couple of days. Also, if you're running into issues with that, please do not fret. We have 30 days to get all of that sorted out for you. All right. So even if you don't have a TMS account yet, or you've submitted it and you're still waiting for validation, it's okay. Our team is dedicated to ensuring that everyone who is entitled to their continuing education credits will receive them as quickly as possible. Okay. Second, we love to hear your thoughts and feedback about our conference each year. And truthfully, this isn't just lip service. Like, we actually do look at all of the feedback. So like this year's edition of interactive workshops, that was decided specifically because we got so many recommendations by attendees at last year's events of, we want something more interactive, maybe breakout sessions, and kind of took it from there. So please make sure you complete the feedback survey that's going to be on the next screen. The link and the QR code are going to be listed on that slide. However, if you're applying for continuing education credits, keep in mind that that survey is different than the post-event evaluation that you'll need to do for your continuing education credits. Okay, so 2 separate surveys. One, we would love to hear, we take all of that feedback into consideration. The other, to make sure you get your continuing education certificate. Okay, and then third, if you weren't able to join us for the entire conference day, we realize Friday afternoon can be kind of a difficult time in terms of scheduling. Or if you're like me and you're dying to see what was in those other breakout workshops, make sure and come back and watch the conference recordings. Okay, they're going to be uploaded to this site within a couple of days, and you have until next year, 1 year from today, so next May 5th, in order to log back in, review them to your heart's content. All right, and then the last thing is, I'd like everybody to pull out their smartphone. I know it's not too far away from you, and mark your calendars for next year. Okay, we are already in the planning stages for next year's conference, and it's scheduled to take place on May 5th, 2023. Hope to see you there. And so once again, please allow me to thank you for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and please enjoy the rest of your Friday.